It's request time! Yes, I'm back with a review of a film from way back when. A time when it was trendy to make 3-hour movies with hotshot blonde boys getting in bed with rich girls with no personalities. Everybody, meet Joe Black. He has indeed got a runtime of nearly 3 hours and is classified as a romantic fantasy mystery film. It has a concept that is pure gold and a casting that would pique any film buff's interest. Anthony Hopkins plays Bill Parrish, a news company CEO who only has a few days to live before his 65th birthday. Death itself stalks him in the form of Brad Pitt in a suit, who requires a guided tour of Bill's life before its end. Why? Who knows? This rather unique vision of a concretely imagined character is praiseworthy, alongside the tension arising from Death's identity being potentially revealed to Bill's family and co-workers. Most importantly, it is Bill's daughter being infatuated with this new visitor that provides a leash over Death without her even realizing. It is partially inspired by the 1930s film Death Takes a Holiday, where Death literally stops being a thing for 3 days. Death's absence in Meet Joe Black never really has any repercussions on the world at large, but we at least get a nod to its inspiration.
Easy, Bill. You'll give yourself a heart attack and ruin my vacation.
Putting Death in a human skin makes for some hilarious and emotionally poignant moments. Despite being marketed as a romantic comedy though, the main selling point of this movie at the time wasn't the movie itself, but the fact that the theatrical trailer for Star Wars The Phantom Menace would be shown before screenings of this film. It's pretty messed up that, according to this random YouTube video, people would buy tickets, watch the trailer, and then leave the cinema in droves. And it wasn't just Meet Joe Black that got this treatment. It must have been upsetting for director Martin Brest to have heard that people weren't going to see his film for the film, with the film's financial success potentially being dependent on the biggest space fantasy franchise of all time. Having said that, most of the film's success was due to overseas ticket sales, so it's not entirely the case that Star Wars saved this movie from bombing. Throughout the 80s and 90s, Martin Brest directed a slew of successful movies, none of which I've actually seen, by the way. Both Midnight Run and Scent of a Woman have been on my watch list for a bloody long time though. Meet Joe Black is his semi-final movie, with his final credited movie, Giggly, being one of the great Hollywood flops. Apparently whole segments of Giggly were rewritten and reshot without him even knowing, and then Martin Chickenbreast
vanished without a trace.
He hasn't made a movie since. And with that, I'm now going to be spoiling Meet Joe Black from start to finish, so watch the movie, or don't, and be sure to make a pledge on my Patreon page for early access to my content. Heck, you can even request a video like this one if you think you're hard enough. The opening of the movie gives off a very goofy vibe. I believe this to be intentional though, for the sake of the twist of this bloke getting rammed by not one but 2 cars at the 21-minute mark. The melodramatic acting from Brad Pitt and Claire Forlani, the coincidental matching way they make their coffee, and just how forward this unnamed character is about marriage.
If you and I were married, I would want to give you what you need. That's all. I'm talking about taking care of each other the best you can. What's wrong with taking care of a woman? She takes care of you.
Lulled me into this false sense of certainty that the movie would be focusing primarily on this pair's cheesy romance. I should say that this is largely what the movie winds up being about by the end, but there's definitely more to this film than just that. The idea of a chance meeting is something that's almost impossible to believe in, and even the characters acknowledge this in their dialogue.
You'll have a hard time finding women like that these days.
It's a lucky day. Just get in the big bad city. Not only do I find a doctor, but a beautiful woman as well.
At the same time, this is what makes this sequence of the pair observing each other's backs to be bizarrely contrived. Even his death makes you wonder just how somebody could stand in the middle of a road with heavy traffic for so long, unless he was just hopelessly in love. I think this element is what changes this death from being comical to tragically sudden. Everything up until that point was almost artificially miraculous, and yet the shot hides so little in the way of violence, the CGI holds up 25 years later really well, and the staging for the death makes the whole thing look really believable. This death is what connects the romantic story with what I believe to be the far more interesting angle of this movie relating to Bill Parrish and his inevitable death. The fear of running out of time, leaving things unfinished, these anxieties are manifested by a voice that speaks to him seemingly from within.
Try. Because if you haven't tried, haven't lived.
The mystery is initially intriguing, as is the identity of this voice, which we initially hear as Hopkins' own. This voice doesn't exactly transform into Brad Pitt's, but simply disappears as Death's physical form appears from behind a curtain. It's this moment...
Am I going to die? Yes.
where the voice's identity is revealed. It is not merely the voice of Bill's anxieties, but death itself in human form. We understand from Pitt's facial expressions that the tone of the film has changed, just as the character we thought we knew is now being grotesquely puppeted for Death's entertainment. The scene in which the film takes its namesake is the absolute peak of its quality. The way Hopkins uncomfortably drags out the reveal of Joe's name provides some superbly painful comedy.
I'm sorry, it's gone right out of my head. I'm sorry, this is Joe.
Death is not a mere ghost that sits on Bill's shoulder, but is a walking, talking person that needs his identity to remain hidden during his stay. Bill's family probably see their patriarch as slowly going senile, and so just accept his hesitation in this scene. It does seem a little questionable that an entity that has stalked humanity since its inception would often behave like a toddler.
I guess you've heard all this Turning Times before, huh?
More.
No, thank you. I have one, thank you.
But we go along with the pretense anyway for the mere fact of it being thoroughly entertaining. The most absurd aspect of this factor is Death's fascination with peanut butter. At first it is kind of funny, but as the movie goes on, it's clear that it only serves to create lame jokes.
Do you like making love with me?
Yes.
More than you love peanut butter?
Yes.
Can I get you anything, sir?
Do you have any peanut butter?
I don't think so, sir.
Compounded with such a stark contrast between the stranger and Joe Black, Pitt's performance of the latter makes the character very captivating to watch. As though the scenario wasn't insane enough, the return of daughter Susan turns the tables once again. It leaves one fundamental question in the viewer's mind. Will she find out the original Joe Black is dead? The short answer is sadly no, but the better answer is this. Her not knowing creates sustained suspense throughout the movie. The revelation of Joe Black's true identity would affect Susan the hardest, given that she literally fell in love at the beginning of the film. This is how a weird love triangle manifests itself between Death, Susan, and her father. I know calling it a love triangle might sound a little weird, but the parental relationship the pair share is a little more than friendly.
Ready for action.
Okay, well, it's flowers. Hey, Dad.
Hi.
Good night.
Morning, honey.
And get some food in that flat tummy of yours. I love you, Daddy.
I know you're all as uncomfortable as I am.
Meet Joe Black is sometimes reminiscent of a Shakespearean play. We have the sanctified secret identity of Joe Black, accompanied by a character exploration of a dying patriarch. If we take the concept of a dying patriarch and extrapolate it to exploring who takes over the company, with the characters vying for the company's ownership, we have HBO's series Succession. The character Drew shares parallels with Kendall Roy, and the suck-up character Quince also shares similarities with the character Tom. Bill Parrish and Logan Roy operate on very similar levels in their stories too, except for one fundamental difference. Bill Parrish is painted as a good person. On my first watch of this film, I was led to believe that Bill bore a certain degree of questionable behavior due to the way he shrugs off the relationship he had with his wife before she died.
Do you love Drew?
You mean like you loved Mom?
Forget about me, Mom.
But then later we find that his words of advice about falling in love and it striking like lightning were in fact genuine and not stemming from some form of regret.
Everything reminds me of her. There isn't a day goes by that I don't think about her. One day she didn't feel well, the next day she was gone.
From there, he doesn't exactly display any flaws or vaguely questionable moral behaviors. We don't learn much about his past that might have led him to become the great man he is. He is just deemed unquestioningly good by his family.
Everybody loves you.
This is why I found the board's decision to force him into retirement to be so jarring and forced. We don't really get to learn about what Parrish is like at work, aside from being dead straight and honest with his board about a deal he doesn't like. The closest we get to seeing how ruthless Bill Parrish is in a scene where he confronts Death about visiting his daughter at the hospital.
You tell me, Bill.
No, how about you telling me? I ask a simple question, I expect a straight answer. That's what I'm used to. Anybody who doesn't give it to me, I fire.
But this merely serves to show Parrish as willing to defend his daughter's honor. Worse still, we never even see him fire anybody in the movie. There's not exactly a precedent for this idea of ruthlessness within this character, so this line just winds up falling flat on its face. What Succession gets right about toxic billionaire behavior reveals how Meet Joe Black's characters and the corporate takeover plot could have been so much more. With the film already juggling two heavy plots to begin with, it's understandable that a lesser plotline would lack any real weight behind it. At the same time, I think it would have been best if they had left the board meeting scenes on the cutting room floor. It was therefore unsurprising to learn that the TV and airline cut of this film gave me what I wished for, much to the upset of the director, who removed his own name from the credits of said 2-hour version. This subplot isn't entirely without merit, however. The first scene with the board meeting is punctuated really nicely by the question that was on everybody's minds.
Who is that guy?
And I also appreciated how they tied the death and taxes lines into the reveal that Joe Black was an IRS agent. I was practically begging for Bill to proclaim that Joe was actually his long-lost son the whole time, but this alternative fits a lot more thematically within the context of the film. Whilst Joe is investigating Bill Parrish, he also explores the hospital where Susan works. At first it seems like he wants to get to know Susan better, but instead runs into an old Jamaican lady and her daughter.
Everything gonna be airy. Go with the doctor, lady. Mom gonna be fine now.
Don't leave.
I'm not sure if this is cultural appropriation or just plain insulting. It's not even a question of Brad Pitt's talent. The accent is pretty accurate. It's just how the daughter of this dying woman, stressed out enough as it is, gives the most wooden reaction to a white guy impersonating her mother's accent. Worse still, she then proceeds to leave her mother with this stranger, and then, get this, he starts touching her.
I realize now, my being here, it's not quite appropriate.
These bizarre sequences muddy my belief in Susan's attraction for Joe. Her lack of bewilderment at his behavior, like, how are you okay with him doing this to your patient? Are you even a real doctor? I'm not even sure what purpose these scenes served aside from reminding Death that he should tell Susan who he really is sometime soon, something that Bill Parrish does throughout the entire film. We return to the Parrish household for a second night of dinner. It leads to the most underwhelming breakup between Drew and Susan and a totally random outburst from Bill's son-in-law, Quince.
I remember when you were little girls, and
I love little girls.
Like, seriously, this comment of his never gets brought up again in the movie.
I love kids, Charlie! I love kids!
It led me to wonder why Quince and his wife, also Bill's daughter Annie, don't have any children. This is certainly a testament to how underdeveloped this couple wind up being in the grand scheme. Further evidence of this can be found when Bill rejects the cakes presented to him, upsetting Annie in the process. The premise of Susan being the favourite daughter played into this nicely. Unfortunately, Annie was far too forgiving of her father to make her a believable character.
Oh, why am I doing this? I should have my head examined again.
Clearly there was some semblance of character lying around in the back of the screenwriter's minds.
this one.
He gives a
But Bill just displayed that he clearly doesn't.
I don't like cake.
If it weren't for this soppy, overplayed music throughout the film, this scene would paint Bill Parrish as the devil, falsely glorifying the cake he's eating. And when it comes to wrapping up the whole favourite sister storyline, Annie just accepts her lot and carries on masking her misery.
So, never mind favorites. You're allowed to have one.
Ay, ay, ay. It turns out the movie was playing a double bluff with its score though, because when we hear it for the first time, it enforces a blissful, isn't what you're watching lovely idea. Then, for a good while after Mystery Man's death, no music is heard. Once it starts up again though, it's as though the romantic cheese starts creeping in, and not at all for the betterment of the film's quality. It plays so many times in the film. The score honestly starts to sound closer to nails on a chalkboard than something that would produce emotions for the audience. It sometimes forces emotion when there's none there, and can even muddy the intent behind the actors' performances.
I don't like your tone, and I don't like your references.
And I don't give a shit. Cut all the about yourself.
I'll say it again. Be careful, Bill.
The seething anger that Hopkins is trying to muster here, the smile that Pitt's produces could even be seen as an evil grin, but both are downplayed by the score. They could have just done without it entirely. We have now reached the inevitable sex scene between Joe and Susan, and I've got to say, I really don't like Susan, and nor do I really care for Claire Filani's performance. Even when the script is trying to create heartbreaking moments, she's just seen smiling all the bloody time.
I only would tell you that with Joe, you're on very, very dangerous ground.
I love him. I'm in love with a man, but I don't know who he is, where he's going, or when.
I can tell you the when part. Tonight.
And I get it, she's acting on her father's instructions.
Be deliriously happy, Earl.
Okay. Be deliriously happy. I shall do my utmost.
But my understanding was that he gave her this advice on the basis that she was cynical about falling in love. That cynicism never ever comes back for the remaining 2 hours and 40 minutes of the film. On the one hand, the movie preaches a form of acceptance in knowing everything about your partner.
You know each other's secrets.
Deepest, darkest secrets.
Yeah, and then you're free. You're free to love each other completely, totally. Just no fear.
And on the other, it doesn't give Susan nearly enough to justify her unquestioning acceptance of Joe as a good man, despite knowing absolutely nothing about him.
And you said that you didn't want me to be your doctor because you didn't want me to examine you. Why I got to examine you after all.
You didn't really. Physically, yeah, you got a good sneaky peek at the junk in his trunk, but does a man of mystery really get girls going? And I don't mean just getting turned on, I mean long-term relationship material. I get the need for the romantic dynamic between the two, but the way that she is entirely paralyzed by love makes her completely unreliable as a rootable or believable character.
I love making love to you.
This might be the goofiest line in movie history. This party that the movie had been building up to takes up about a third of the film's runtime. In spite of that, very little besides the inevitable actually happens. Yes, Anthony Hopkins has some moments to allow his performance to shine, even having a speech before his departure into the afterlife.
I regret to announce this is the end. I'm going now.
But this segment is largely dragged out by characters just staring at each other, holding each other in this 7-minute long segment of Joe saying goodbye to Susan.
You're someone else.
I'm sorry, could you speak into my good ear?
It was here that I realized what this movie needed was a revelation like this one, just
amplified.
Having Susan realize that Joe had been lying about his identity would have done this movie a favor. Or better still, have her find out that the bloke she met at the coffee shop died and have her confront the fact that he's alive and well right in front of her. Instead, the producers turned the cheese meter up from Camembert to stinking Bishop. We're left with a scene that has nothing to say, with some of the most wooden acting I've ever seen in a movie. Remember I was having a grumble about the score earlier? earlier, the ending of this film is so dragged out that they literally play this cover of What a Wonderful World from start to finish throughout Bill and Susan's farewell dialogue. Then, when the pair dance, they just play the same song all over again. And I know they played it twice because the cover is 3.5 minutes long, whereas the time between the end of Bill's speech and the fireworks going off is just shy of 5 minutes. I mean, Jesus, did Bill love this song so much that he requested for it to be played all over again? Susan's unbelievability as a character reaches a peak when she finishes dancing with her father.
The fireworks are starting.
Yeah, no shit, Sherlock. I think he might have noticed that.
You're going ahead, honey. Just gonna catch my breath.
Now, it's not like the pair danced a samba or anything. You'd think your father being short of breath would maybe be a cause for concern, Dr. Parrish. Instead, she just stares at him, hugs him, and then starts crying. I know she previously said this.
Everybody's saying goodbye.
Despite only one other person actually says goodbye to her all evening, there's not a single valid reason for Susan to believe that her father is going anywhere. She doesn't and shouldn't have any idea that this is the last time she will be with him. The only real positive thing about this closing scene I have to mention is this line.
It's hard to let go, isn't it?
Yes, it is, Bill.
Well, that's life. What can I tell you?
Like, that is just beautiful. Wonderfully delivered, well earned by the story. They honestly should have just ended the movie there, with the pair walking away into the darkness. Unfortunately, they managed to drag the film out for another 5 minutes, with Susan chasing after the pair, only to find Joe returning, but plot twist, it's not actually Joe, it's the guy who got mangled by those cars at the start of the film. We know this because he doesn't recognize the party he's supposed to have been attending all evening and is able to quote what Susan told him at the coffee shop that Joe could never remember. She doesn't question why her father has mysteriously disappeared or why this man's personality has dramatically shifted once again.
I wish you could have known my father.
You're talking like you knew he was going to die and that he's already passed. How do you know these things? While the script began to train wreck itself so spectacularly, I wasn't so quick to forget about the spectacular fireworks that are supposed to be going off throughout this entire scene. I was so distracted by how the lighting from the fireworks wasn't flashing onto their faces in these shot reverse shots. These painfully drawn out scenes go on for so long with so little change in the cinematography. It just looks like the fireworks have had the pause button pressed just so these conversations can take place. They suddenly begin again just in time for the final shot of the film, the one that probably required the most precise timing to get right, which I can appreciate, except that everybody else on set has vanished. You expect me to believe that all the people at this massive party are all sitting still as statues right here? It just reeks of a phony, cheesy, wishy-washy conclusion to a film that is in serious need of a trim. So, did it suck? I'm going to quote James Berardinelli in his review of this film. Brest transforms a seemingly foolproof idea into an overblown bore. I couldn't agree more. This film on paper is a runaway success. The concept, the casting, genius. When it comes to execution, however, it's all over the place. How they can just boil a corporate takeover subplot down to 3 or 4 scenes, and yet have Brad Pitt and Claire Forlani staring at and hugging each other for 7 minutes straight? Pacing is clearly this movie's biggest issue. Anthony Hopkins providing a good performance for this film is a given, but this is definitely not his most notable role. The same can be said for Brad Pitt, to be honest. When it comes to realizing the vision of humanizing death, Joe Black doesn't truly pose much of a threat to Bill once he's molded into the background. I think it's largely due to this bland romantic story that the movie falls apart so miserably. It's essential for the tension between Bill and death, but despite so much being dedicated to the romance, it's definitely the weakest aspect of this film. I give Meet Joe Black a 4 out of 10.